Hello everyone, this is Women's Grandmaster Sabina Foisor. Thank you for joining St. Louis Chess Club's YouTube live stream with me. For this first lecture, which is called Grandmaster's Choice, I decided to talk about some mess-ups or missteps or just show some of my terrible games in the US Championship last year. I hope you guys will enjoy it. I think it's always great when someone is willing to share games that they mess up, because usually you are seeing just the great stuff, but there's always so much to learn from games that you mess up, so I thought it would be a nice topic. Without further ado, let's get started. I hope everything is going as planned and that I have prepared everything as great as I could. All right. Okay, so this was this is a position from my game from the first round in the US Championship last year, which is actually which took place online. We played it on Lichess, and the first round I played against international master and another favorite at the St. Louis Chess Club, Dorsa Derakhshani. She was playing in her second US Championship, and we reached this position. I thought I had a much better position in this moment. And so I mean, why is that? Because like normally if you look at the position, you might not really agree with what I'm saying, but basically white has a slightly better pawn structure. If you're looking at white's pawn structure, we only have 2 islands of pawns. Black has 3, has also these double pawns here on the e file. The queen is kind of out of play, but something that's not so great maybe for white is the fact that this knight is not staying very well. It's a little bit passive, and it seems like black has a little bit more space, and with the file being opened, it may seem like black is not doing so badly, but I did think in the game that I have a small advantage, and I do have indeed. It is very important to take your time and try to understand, you know, what are the weaknesses that each side has in order to be able to come up with your next move. And the time control, I guess, didn't permit me, or it didn't even cross my mind that there could be some tactical idea in this position. All I thought about was, well, I have a badly placed knight. Exactly as I started explaining to you, I was like, okay, I have a badly placed knight in d2. I need to try to find a way to improve it. I need to get a little bit more space. How do I do that, right? That's the typical way that you look for things. But if you get this position and someone tells you, take your time, think about the position, and there's a tactic, right? If someone tells you that, you will immediately, I'm telling you, you will immediately be able to figure out what to do here. Unfortunately, that was not the case for me during the game, but now I'm telling you, so we can spend the time to evaluate the position a little bit more and understand that this pawn, specifically in e6 and this one in e4, because they are double, they're also not very well protected, and because of that, we actually have a way to win some material here with white. So the move that I should have played in this position, or would have been possibly the best move here, would have been knight takes e4. I could take in c8 as well first, and then knight e4. And the point is that after knight takes e4, we can take now. So it really doesn't matter. The straight doesn't necessarily matter if you do it first or not. And then we can go queen g4, attacking those 2 pieces. And obviously you cannot go back knight f6 because we take and you're losing a lot of material. So with black, you probably have to go knight g5 to give the piece back and not allow white to take an extra pawn and maybe even your rook. And then white would capture here. White has an extra pawn, an active queen. The pawn structure is still very good for white. Big chances to win this, right? Yeah. So the other possibility is, of course, to trade. As I said, I don't think I considered this and I looked it up with the computer as well, and it didn't seem like there was a big difference between the two. We captured the pawn once again, and then queen g4 with the same idea, getting one of these two pieces. That would have been something much better for me to do. And when I looked this game up, like, it took me a little bit of time after the championship to go over my games and just, you know, kind of remind myself about the tough tournament that I had. I felt really bad that I missed this beautiful tactic, and I thought, okay, this will be a great example to show someone at some point. I did show it to some of my students, but now I get to share it with the world, and it will always stay here as, you know, tough miss for me. Now, of course, you sometimes, like, it happens often, it could be so many reasons why specific ideas you're not seeing them. Sometimes it's pattern recognition, sometimes you simply don't have it, sometimes you are so much focused on one idea, which is actually something that I did myself. I was so much focused on trying to improve the position of my knight and feeling that I'm a little bit restricted that I completely forgot to think of other things. That's why I believe it is very important, regardless of what your level is, to take time in positions where you feel you are spending too much focused on one idea, to try to take your time and just take a step back and try to emphasize on other possibilities. Maybe even take the time to reevaluate the position, even if you just played it, right? You think you know everything about it. Every new vision or every new watch on a position can actually help you come up with new ideas. You never know what you may miss, so try to avoid staying stuck on one idea only. So here, basically, instead of, you know, focusing on that idea, I decided to improve my position. And the first thing that I thought was necessary before I considered b4 and knight b3 ideas, I thought I need some air. I need to create a Luft, as the Germans say. So I went for h3, which typically is, I would say, a very natural move, prophylactic in a way, creating a Luft, stopping any kind of knight g4s in some situations. But this can also be a weakness, and it proved to be something that helped my opponent a little bit later in the game. She's made a mistake here. She played rook c7, which allows me to take control over the c file, which we will see in a moment. Instead of that, I believe she should have tried to think what is her worst place piece in this position, or what is the piece that does not do so much anymore as it was doing previously, and that was the queen in a5. I believe, you know, for black, it would have been a nice idea to try to bring in her queen back, you know, on the king side, try to put in some pressure on my king, get to maybe defend the e6 pawn, and just, you know, stay a little bit closer. And then, of course, I wouldn't have those sacrifice ideas, and also keeping the rook in c8 protected, so in case of capture, queen takes. But she's made this mistake, rook to c7. And I was very happy in this position because I felt finally I can improve the position of my knight and take over the c file. The correct move here is knight b3 with tempo to the queen. I believe my opponent might have missed this move. Queen b6 only move, and now trades. And because I have my knight in b3, I'm defending the c1 square, so I can play rook to c1. And I took over the c file. So now if we take another moment to see what has happened, every time there are trades on the board, I think it is very important to once again take a step back, relax, and think about what you want to do next, or what has changed. Because you basically finished a part of your plan, and you have to think about the second part. What will you do next? And in this case, I think for white, you realize that your knight is on a slightly better position. You realize that you took over the c-file. You realize you have the opportunity to get the rook active on 6th rank. Maybe you can double on the c-file and get it even on 7th. But you also have to think for the opponent. And that is something we often forget to do, regardless of the level. And as you can see, I'm not just trying to tell you what to do. I'm trying to acknowledge the fact that I didn't do those things either. And it's very important to remind ourselves to do them. Black has changed their position as well with the trade that happened, and with the movement of the queen coming on the f-file. Now black could have some opportunities of attack on the king side. And that is not something you should take lightly. Of course, you see that you have the queen in e2 and you're protecting the f2 pawn, so you're not even thinking that something crazy could happen here. But it is certainly something to be cautious about, because it means that you cannot activate your queen. Your queen will have to stay here. So anyways, in this position, I decided to go I've made a terrible decision here. Instead of following up with the idea that I have in the first place, which was, just basically activating my rook to c6, that was a very natural move that I should have played here. It's a fork, it's an active rook. This knight always has the opportunity to retreat as well if needed, and the rook is the one that takes over the c-file. Instead of doing that, for some reason, I decided to go knight a5, because I thought the knight would be looking better in c6. Remember, it's not about the looks. It's not about the looks of things. Even if you are that kind of positional player that you want everything to be perfect and happen according to something specific, no, just try to think of what the position may need, what we require. And if it's an open file and you have just taken control over it, you want those open files for your rooks. You want your rooks to get active. So rook c6 should have been the move for me to play. Instead, I play knight a5. Now, I'm not losing all of my advantage by playing this move, but it's certainly a waste of time for me. And as soon as I played this move, I remember that I thought about a very interesting idea that my opponent could have, and she has almost immediately seen it and played it too, of course. So I remember when I told you that h3 was an interesting move for me, an interesting way to get a luft and everything, and stop some knight g4, indeed. But in the same time, this has been created as a hook that allows black to find a way to open up the g-file, in the same time getting this g4 square for the knight. So she has played this beautiful g5 idea with, the follow-up of playing g4, trying to trade. They're getting the queen on the g-file, knight to g4, and then putting pressure on f2 and having mating threats in h2. So this has certainly come as a, how to say, I was not very happy when I saw this move. And, but it wasn't like an alarm sign for me, unfortunately. It should have been, but it wasn't. I thought, okay, g4 doesn't do anything because I always get to take. She will take back. She will play queen g6 or queen g7. She will take that pawn, and then nothing is going to happen, really. It's just, a little bit of an attack, but I'll get to be active and, everything will be fine. Little did I know that that was going to cost me the game. I think, considering, you have to consider the time control that you're playing as well. I think that's also very important. If you play short time controls, maybe you have time to swindle your opponent. But if it's a little bit of a longer time control, you don't really have the chance to do that. So I think If you want to be cautious for potential attack, you see that it could be annoying, try to find ways to blockade things. So g3 probably should have been a move for me to consider, because the point is that if you will ever play g4, I can always play h4, keep the position closed there. There's no entrance for black. Indeed, I'm creating this hole for myself and I'm leaving the f2 pawn backwards. But since the knight cannot reach to attack f2, I mean, it will take forever, or it will be impossible for it to get to d3. I'm totally safe. So I can proceed with my attack and ideas on the queen side with rook c6. And if she's considering something like h5, I don't care so much, because again, I'm doing the same thing. In h4, I can always stop that with g4. I'm keeping once again the position closed, and there's no entrance for black's pieces. No way to reach my king, even if I'm creating some weaknesses. Of course, this does not work in every single position, but here it could work. So I didn't feel scared just yet, so I went for rook c6. And now things are getting a little bit scary, because my pawn played g4. Of course, that was the plan. And the first moment where I'm getting towards the worst position was the fact that I decided to take. It is natural in a way to want to take, because you're thinking you don't really want black to capture in h3 and actually open up the file on your king. But the point is that that's not such a dangerous threat. h4 would have been the alternative, I think, in a way to try to play g3 and kind of get to a similar position as I showed you previously. But I thought that she could give up the pawn, and this is a nice tactical idea, a nice theme to be aware of, that when attacking, you can give up material to get squares for other pieces. So you give up pawns specifically in order to mess up your opponent's pawn structure or get some outposts for some of your other pieces. And if g3 was going to be played, we can just recapture. And then maybe they can play moves like queen g6, knight h5. There's the g4 square for the knight as well. Black will eventually get their pawn back, and my king will be a little bit weak. So this was the reason why I didn't quite want to play h4. Something else I could have done, though, was to take in d6. And then this position, I did analyze it a little bit with the engine, and it seemed like black doesn't quite have a way to really take over my king. I should be pretty safe here, because next move I'll be able to play queen f1, try to bring the queen to g2 or g1, trade it off, and black will not be able to mate me. And if I activated my rook, okay, it should be pretty balanced. Instead, as I mentioned, in this position, I played h takes g4. And of course, you cannot recapture, but she had queen g6. That was all part of the plan. And this was the last moment where I could try to, you know, you never go from a much better position, or maybe even like a huge advantage. You never go from that, or very rarely do you go from that to completely losing. You need time for those things to happen. You have a couple of moves to blunder and blunder and blunder, or make a mistake and another one. And here, I made the final one. I was greedy. I went for the pawn, after which the position is completely lost. So instead of that, I had to just maybe g5 or maybe f4. I remember this was a move that I considered, but for some reason I was a little bit scared of the en passant. After pawn takes, I thought black plays h5, and my king will be completely naked. I'll have no chance to keep it safe in any way, and I don't know, I just felt it would be really bad. But you cannot just go necessarily just feeling. You have to spend the time and calculate, which unfortunately I did not do. In this case, queen c2 probably would have been a much better the move to consider. Try to trade the queens so that the opponent doesn't have a chance to checkmate you. Of course, you would not have traded queens. Maybe she would have played queen g5. But then I think I could just play f4 and just kind of force her to take in g4, then go for queen g2, force the queen trade, and this endgame I should not be worse. Even if she has maybe a further away passed pawn, I have my active rook, the knight there, maybe will finally make sense that I placed it there, and things could be just fine. Unfortunately, what happened to me in this game, I captured that pawn, and it is clear that now after knight g4, which is something that I missed, I remember, I saw that you would have the opportunity to take here, but I thought, well, you know what, it's not that bad. I'm getting a lot of pawns. I can afford to sacrifice the queen for the rook and the knight. And as soon as she played it, I was like, wait a second, I saw this. I knew this should not happen. She actually wants moves like queen h5 and queen h2, and then it's a checkmate. So like, oh man, I realized, what have I done? What have you done, Sabina? You know, and it's just so simple. The toughest part is when you see something and you forget about it, or I don't know, something happens, and yeah. Anyways, so I played a few more moves here, but unfortunately they weren't very helpful. She checked me. I tried to run away on the other side, but after queen takes g2, f4, trying to trade my last chance to trade queens en passant, and now it is game over, queen f2, and I have no way to stop the pawn from promoting. So unfortunately, I went from a much better position where I could have won a pawn step by step into a much worse one. What was the lesson here? Make sure you don't stay stuck on one idea. You see something that needs improvement, good, consider that idea, but don't forget there could be others in a position. The game of chess is so amazingly beautiful, and you can be so creative. There's almost never just one move. You always have a multitude of moves and of ideas. You just need to be willing to search for them. Don't forget to search for as many of them as possible. The next position, I don't know. I mean, this was the order more or less in which I played these games, so I'm not trying to pick someone. I didn't try to pick someone in particular or such. But my next position that I want to choose was an endgame that I played against another favorite from the San Luis Chess Club, who is making great streams for the club, Thalia Cervantes. She's I'm looking forward to see everything she can achieve in chess. She definitely has it, and she's always giving her all when she plays. You can clearly see that. In this game that we played, I had a much better position in the opening, and then step by step I kind of messed it up and got into time trouble. I mean, it was a rapid, so okay, we got both low on time and eventually reached this end game. I had the white pieces, and I thought in this end game I had some chances. Here she played bishop b6. The bishop is attacked. Of course, I'm trying to get my pawn back here, and I have the chance to take it back. And she has to choose where to move her bishop. She chose the b6 square, but maybe e5 could have been slightly better with the idea that after capture, going back, like, you know, this square is control. I mean, okay, I would take this pawn, but I think this endgame, possibly trading, I think despite the fact that I have an extra pawn and it's bishops of the same color, I think it is very difficult for white to improve. If black just brings the king, you know, in the center, it is very hard to imagine that white can actually improve the position. Instead of that, she played bishop b6. And as I said, it was a rapid tournament, so obviously neither of us had much time left here. This is move 40. But if you have the time, which I had after playing the game, you realize what an interesting position it is. At least I do believe so. And white has a few options that have to be considered. Now, what I can say is that I know a lot of coaches, when they teach kids of, you know, or adults of different levels, they talk about the importance of forcing moves. And when you see a position where there are potential, moves that are forcing, you should consider them. And those kind of moves are checks, captures, or, moves that create a very big threat like mate, forks, tactical ideas. And those are the most, you should consider. But also, you are told that you should try to have candidate moves. Although maybe not everyone agrees with that. Kotov used to have this book that I studied when I was a kid, and it was talking about the different, candidate moves you should consider, like a tree, and you would write down all of them. And I remember I worked through that, but many grandmasters I talk to these days are telling me that they don't really quite believe that is the way chess should be approached these days. I can't tell you exactly, but what I can tell you is that you have to try to analyze positions the way you feel it helps you the most. And so if you feel like working with candidate moves helps you make the best decision, that's how you should do it. If you feel that you should always look for forcing moves, you should consider doing that. If you feel that stopping for a second and evaluating the position first and looking for the weaknesses of each side or your badly placed pieces helps you, you can do that. There are many ways you can try to improve in chess. Now, in this position, for white, we have two moves that make a lot of sense. And both of them happen to be captures. One of them is with check, obviously, capturing in f7, and the other one is capturing this bishop in b6. If you do have the time, you most likely will make the right decision. If you don't have the time, like I didn't have the time, you'll make the wrong one. Or maybe simply, I just made the wrong one, and everyone else would have made the right one. I don't know. The point is that in this position, it is very important to understand which pawns you want to capture, okay? Which pawns you want to capture, because clearly you have the opportunity to take two, but which ones is it going to be and in which order? Bishop takes b6 would have been the correct way to go about this position, because now we trade the bishop, so we go in a rook endgame. We are creating a new weakness for black, otherwise black has that majority over there, can always play a5 and create a pass pawn and give themselves a counterplay. So you first do that, and then obviously you should take this pawn with check. The king has to go to g6, and here the natural move to play is rook f6, right? So temporarily the material is equal, but now after rook f6, white is going to win one of those two pawns, and then the other one will fall as well. So white will stay with a lot of extra material. King g7 has to be played. It is better for black, in my opinion, not to give up these pawns, because these will be 2 versus 3, and then there won't be the opportunity for white to win on this side of the board. But the problem is after rook takes b6, you cannot defend this pawn, and you don't really have any check or anything to try to get the b pawn. So once white wins that as well, it's going to be game over. If you try instead of that to go play a move like rook here, it's still not helping, because white takes this pawn and then takes this one. And even if you get those two versus these three, these are much stronger, and white has the opportunity to bring in the king to support the pass pawns, which he has. I mean, technically there's just the f1, but there will be two once h4, g5 is being played. Black's king will stay on a mate, so white will be able to win this endgame. It's pretty standard, pretty straightforward, I would say. Instead of that, for some reason, I took this pawn first. And the problem now is that once the king moves, the rook is attacked. You don't have the opportunity to play rook f6 anymore. Black will have the chance to trade the bishops, and then you're not winning anymore. I played rook b7 with a similar idea, and now my opponent played rook b2. I think this is a moment she messed up a little bit. she could have taken my bishop, because the point is that now, even if I win a pawn, right, even if I win this one, the king can approach, and I didn't quite see a way, like simple way for white to really win here. Because eventually, if these two pawns get traded, it will be a draw, 3 versus 2. If they don't get traded, you don't really have an improvement. So I think she should have traded the bishops and go for the endgame. Instead, she played rook b2 and gave me the opportunity to get into a similar position as previously shown. So I took in b6, took rook takes b6, rook takes g6, king h7, and here is another position where you should try to stay a little bit and think of what to do next. You have natural moves, and you also have moves that may not be so natural, but you have to take them into consideration. So what do we notice here? White has these 3 pawns versus 1, but their rook is attacked. So once you move it, you have to think what black's move will be. And it is clear that rook b2 will be the move, to cut off white's king, not let it improve, go up to support the pawns. And if that happens, it will be very, very difficult for white to actually have a chance to win. Because in endgames, it is very, very, very important to bring our king towards the center so that we can support our passed pawns and stop our opponent's passed pawns. And here I can't do either one of those two things. So I played rook b6 out of instinct immediately. But once I stayed and I thought about the position a little bit longer, I realized that that's not the most important thing. Putting the rook behind the opponent's passed pawn is not always the most important thing. You also have to think about other characteristics. In this case is the cutoff of the king, which is going to make it very difficult for white to have chances to win. So instead of going rook to b6, I should have gone, in my opinion, I think this would have been the best try, rook to e6. The point is that now the rook can come back to e2. If you play rook b2, I can play rook to e2. Thankfully, in case of a trade, the king is going to be in the box of this b5 pawn. The box of the pawn on this side of the board would be that, and if you actually want the whole box, it will involve that a file as well. And the point is that now if the rooks get traded, yeah, I am indeed winning. If the rooks don't get traded and my opponent gives me a check, I can go, maybe king f2. And even if this pawn gets to be pushed, we actually can, for example, do this. Try again, trade, so that I can go for the pawn. If you check me, my king goes forward. And my rook, of course, will stop the b pawn. I always have the opportunity to bring the rook back, but what have I succeeded in doing? Uncutting my king, which was my problem in that position, which is something also I didn't think about. I just thought that I need to place my rook behind the pawn because that is the rule. But you don't always follow the rules. Another thing that makes something else that is very important for all of us to think about. Rules in chess do not apply or never apply 100%. You have to be open to changes, and that's what makes chess so difficult and so beautiful and so hard, and however you want to say, all in the same time. And you can't progress like that immediately, because you learn a rule, you think you know everything about it, and then you find out that there are exceptions, and you have to be willing to accept it and always take them into consideration. So this is a way, in my opinion, I could have tried to win. Instead, like I said, I played rook b6, and my opponent played the right thing, rook b2, to cut my king and not let me improve. And my last hope here would have been to actually say, all right, I made a mistake, let's try again. And just go rook e6, and I love this idea because I have another chance to try. I mean, it may not be exactly the same, but because I'm a move behind, but I can still do it. I can still try to trade the rook, uncut myself, and actually use my king, which is a very, very important piece in the endgame. If I wouldn't have seen that move, which obviously I didn't, you have to think about pawn pushes, right? You have to think, will I push the f pawn or will I push the h pawn? If you have to choose between those two, take a moment and think about it. Which one of those two pawns would you push? And why? It's very important, because I pushed the wrong one. Now, because I already have this arrow here, that is a hint that you should already have on the board. The point is that for black, in order to make a draw, they want to trade pawns, right? The more pawns they trade, the better it is for them. So if black plays in, if you push the wrong pawn, rook h2 is an opportunity for black to give up the b pawn, take the h pawn, and as long as their rook doesn't get trapped there, black is going to be able to make a draw, because there's just one pawn left to trade, and then we can have the Philidor position, no problem. Black's king is close enough to get in front of the f pawn. So hopefully by now it is clear to you that it is the h pawn that I should have pushed. So in case the rook would come here, I would have the opportunity to push it forward. This pawn is very hard for me to protect, whereas this one is easier because my king is close by. If you go rook b3 or something, I can get uncut. I can also protect the pawn with my rook if necessary. I won't, but that's a thing to do. So that would have been the pawn. If I didn't see rook e6, that would have been a pawn to try to push forward. And then the idea is, I mean, that, for example, something like this could happen. And then if you push b3, we could go f4. And you don't really have a way to trade your b pawn for either one of these. So this is basically the best line that you can get. But I think this king g8 or king h8 and then f5, I think white has a big chance to win here, because I couldn't find a way for black to take the pawns. Maybe they can try at some point, once my pawns are on the same rank, to play something like rook d1, and when I take just rook d5 or something. So if you have the opportunity to do that, you can make a draw, but otherwise no. So I played f4 instead, gave her the opportunity to go rook b4 here, but so this is a line that could have happened. King g2, b4, king g3, rook c4, check. The king has to go back, but this is clearly winning for white, because I can just go king h4, king h5 there, or take, and I would be winning. Obviously, rook b4 wouldn't be such a good choice. It seems natural, right? But nah. But rook h2. Rook h2 makes way more sense. As I was saying, give that pawn, take this one. And this should be a draw. Even if I get uncut, it's not sufficient for me to win the game. She did play b4 and give me one more chance in this position to stop her from winning my h pawn. I probably could have played king g1 to make sure there's no rook h2. And then, for example, here, check. And then we can go h4 to try to get h5 in. And here, once again, I think I have big chances to win. If you check me, I go here. And I should be winning. And then, of course, we go g5, trades, push, check, push the pawns, winning. So I made one more mistake, playing f5 here, b3, last chance to go king g1, but I didn't do it. I gave that check, and I played h4, and after rook h2, these pawns got traded off, and the game eventually ended in a draw. I'm not going to go over, there's been a lot of moves. Neither of us, I think both of us had forgotten how to press to offer a draw, that we had to press the button twice to offer a draw. We both forgot about it. And unfortunately, you know, we played much longer, but the game ended in a draw. All right. So what did we learn from this? Once again, it is very, very important to not to again, like, not to get stuck on just one idea. Try to have the time to consider different options. Make sure you find a way on how to take your opponent's material the best way possible. If you're getting into an endgame that most likely is a draw, try to find the best way for you to still push for a win. Try to avoid letting your opponent cut you off on the back rank. And especially if they have an opportunity like she had to give up a further away pass pawn for one of yours and then simplifying the position more, try to avoid that as much as possible. Keep more pawns on the board to make it more difficult for your opponent to save the game. Going on with the next position, and actually this one I'm going to basically flip the board because technically I did have black in this position. So this was very interesting. I do not remember exactly which round it was, but I can tell you that I was a little bit, I thought I had a pretty decent position throughout. If we stay here, but just imagine it's a new position and you evaluate it, you realize it's pretty balanced. We both have the bishop pair. Black's king is a little bit weaker due to the fact that this bishop has just captured h6 and that the rook can come to g3 and put pressure, which is, you know, pretty obvious that is going to happen. But you know, we both have the bishop pair, and white is also struggling or has a weakness on back rank. And so we're both not having such a safe king, if we think about it. My opponent played in this position rook to g3. I was playing, by the way, you guys can see Ashritha Eswaran, a very strong chess player from, I think she lives in California. And in this position, she played rook g3. Rook f4 would have been the alternative, like move that you can consider. Ooh, it's fork. That would be a good move. In your mind, you can think that. But really, after queen d7, rook e8 comes in next. These two bishops are protected, and there's no way for white to bring in the queen to actually have serious mating threat. The rook g3 is definitely the best move for her. And this is a position where you do need a little bit of time. You do need to figure out what is it that you're going to do. And bishop h5 is an option, queen d7 is an option, queen e6 is an option, and then taking the bishop is another option. So lots of options here for black. You have to try to find the best one. How do you do it? Well, this is certainly a tricky position, I would say, but I believe certainly this is a position where you need to try to avoid giving up material. Like, why would you give up material if it's not necessary, right? The bishop is attacked, you can protect it. I didn't do that. I like queen d7 very much. I think this move was necessary because I'm taking the queen away from an open file that I actually want to use for the rook. I'm keeping my both bishops protected. Queen e6 is also nice because I would protect but also put pressure on the bishop in h6. If she brings in the queen, this was the move that bothered me a little bit because now she's attacking the bishop and I thought, oh no, I'm going to lose a piece. But actually, as I said, I forgot to consider the fact that my opponent was staying on a back rank mate. So I could play now queen e6. I'm threatening the bishop and I'm also threatening the back rank mate. And she kind of has to play king f1. This is basically the only move for white. If she plays, for example, rook takes g4, there's mate, right? I mean, this is pretty beginner wise thing, but you know, I had to show it. So she cannot do that. So she kind of has to play king f1 here. And I think I can take. And then if she takes, I take back. If she takes, I go back. And then we have equal material, opposite color bishops. Black shouldn't have any problems drawing this. For some reason, I don't know why, I decided to take the bishop instead. Rook takes g4, check bishop, my only move is going back, and queen takes h6. A mistake a lot of people make is that you want to complicate the position a little bit. For a reason or another, you want to complicate it. And you think that by sacrificing material, you complicate the position. Unfortunately, not all of us are like Fischer or Petrosian or Magnus. Although we wish to be playing as great, we are not. And so often we complicate the positions in the wrong fashion. You don't need to give up material always to complicate the position. And sometimes material is material. I mean, I know in some situations we give it for right reason, but in this case, particularly for me, was not the right reason. It was not necessary. I haven't really improved any of my pieces. I lost the pawn, and now I have to find a way to keep the position, I don't know, to defend. Whereas with the other move, you saw, there wasn't a big deal. So I tried. I thought, okay, I have opposite color bishops, so I shouldn't be so worried about what may happen. So I gave this check, and then I played queen to e5. The point being, I want to, of course, I need to defend the mate, but also that pawn is kind of hanging, so I can try to go for that. She played h3, and now I played rook d8, trying to bring in, have some activity. Okay. If you are trying to equalize in a position or trying to make a draw, you realize you made a mistake, you have material disadvantage. Try to think for easier ways to save the position. What have I done here? Obviously, my rook is being attacked, right? So what should you think about in this position? You have a pawn down. What types of endgames are going to be potentially helping black to make a draw? That is the approach you should have in this position, right? What did I do? Definitely not that. But if you're thinking about that, you're thinking which piece you might want to trade. And you see you have opposite color bishops, so you can think in an opposite color bishops endgame, you have the opportunity to draw, right? So then you should tell yourself, okay, I should trade rooks, I should trade queens. The simplest way, rook d4, right? It seems pretty straightforward. There doesn't seem to be a way for white to avoid this trade. If the rooks get traded, black should have no problem making a draw in this position. If you're not trading the queens, then this pawn is going to be hanging. If you trade the queens, bishop takes back, and there's no improvement. There's not going to be an improvement for white. But instead of doing that, I thought I should keep the rook on the board. Wrong decision, because the more pieces there are on the board, the harder it is for you to hold on to the position too much. You have a lot of pieces. They can put up an attack as well. And let's not forget, black's king is pretty weak. She played bishop d3, which maybe wasn't the best. She probably should have played a move like b3 to avoid allowing me to capture my pawn back. And once again, wrong decision. I panicked about a very simple check. Make sure you consider your opponent's threats. They're real threats. Don't fall for ghosts. Free pawn, I should have taken it. I didn't quite see a way for white to get much after I would have recaptured my pawn. But instead I play king f8, and now I fell for another tactic. I missed this opportunity that after this check she can play f4, and now she forces the queens to be traded. But not too bad either. I basically am going slowly towards an endgame that is beneficial to me. If I get to trade rooks as well, I am going to draw this endgame. So I play bishop f6, and I try to create my counterplay. This part of the game, I think I played pretty okay. I've created my counterplay here a little bit. I'm trying to get these pawns pushed forward to trade a little bit. And then with my king and bishop, I'm trying to stop those pawns. That was my idea. And I've managed to do it really well for quite some time. Let's see. f6, and then I played b5, and I played c5, and I'm wanting to play c4, and then she played g5. You probably shouldn't rush to push the pawns too soon, especially if there's a way for me to stop everything, but unfortunately I didn't quite see it. g6. You put a pawn on white, thinking that now she's going to play f5, bring her rook like this, and then with that g-pawn, she's going to be able to win the game. I played c4, which is a very natural way. As I said, I want to trade material. And now she's bringing in her rook. This is a moment where you have to understand exactly what is white's threat, how serious it is, and what you should do next. So obviously when white plays rook e3, they are not protecting the f4 pawn anymore, but they're threatening something very serious. Check, push the g-pawn, promote it, nothing to do. What shall black do in this position? You have a couple of options. One of them is to take the pawn because it's free, supposedly. The other one is to play king f8 to avoid the rook getting there, and the other one is to play f5. Out of these moves, only one kind of keeps black's chances of making a draw alive. And that move is f5. It's a really nice idea because you're opening up the bishop, so you're not letting that rook get active. That's very important. You want to take the g6 pawn, so the only way to stop that is by capturing here. And now when you take in f4, you're taking with tempo. The bishop still controls. There's no rook e7. And you need to move the bishop or play rook e5. And after this, we have our options. We can play c3. We can play rook f2, try to take that pawn. Oh, what a game this could have been. It could have been a completely different result. It could have been a completely different game. But instead of playing that, oh, by the way, king f8 probably wouldn't work either because white can protect the pawn. And with the bishop in c2, it's kind of difficult to imagine that there's progress. If black plays here, bishop f5. And the king also can come and support the passed pawn. But I took here instead, and I fell for a very simple tactical idea. This is what happens also when you don't have that much time, by the way. Rook here, g7 check. And now, obviously, you can't play bishop h7, but that's not necessary. The bishop can come on this other diagonal. There's no way to really stop it other than sacrificing the rook. But this is not going to be sufficient for me to actually save the game. I have an exchange down. White is winning more pawns. It is game over. I ended up playing a little bit more because I don't always like to resign immediately. But that was it. Game over. Well, these were the games or the positions from the games that I played in US Women's Championship last year. I felt for today, I wanted to show that we all make mistakes and we have to be willing to look them up, try to understand where we went wrong, and take them as learning experiences to get to be better, to improve, and try to avoid making those same mistakes again. You should never be feeling bad about a position that or a game that you played. You should never feel bad that you lost. I mean, you should feel bad a little bit. I mean, but you should try to take it as a way to improve understand the mistakes, and try to find that kind of material in positions from books, or ask your coaches to help you with the types of positions that you seem to mess up in your games. This was my choice for today's lecture. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm going to be sharing more things in the future, but for now, this is it. Make sure you study your endgames, candidate moves, learn to evaluate the position, and be open to losing. With that said, I'm going to finish this video, and I hope I'm going to see you in the next one, where I'm going to show my selection of this week's best, or my favorite games for this week, the ones that I was able to see and find and I thought were cool. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye for now.